The pain shot through Elena Morales' shoulders like fire, and she stumbled on the dusty road leading into Silver Creek, Montana territory. In the blazing summer heat of 1882, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of earth with each unsteady step. The wooden buckets suspended from the yoke across her shoulders sloshed water onto her already damp calico dress, the weight pressing down on her bones until she thought they might snap. She had walked 3 miles from the creek to bring water back to the boarding house where she worked, and her body was finally surrendering to exhaustion. The sun beat mercilessly overhead, turning the main street into a shimmering mirage of false promises and broken dreams. Elena's knees buckled first, sending her lurching forward as the yoke slipped from her shoulders. She tried to catch herself, but her arms had gone numb from the strain. The buckets would crash to the ground, wasting every precious drop she had carried so far. But before metal met earth, strong hands caught the yoke, lifting the weight away from her collapsing frame with surprising gentleness. "Easy now," a deep voice said, steady and calm. "I have got them." Elena looked up through strands of dark hair that had escaped her braid, blinking against the sunlight to see a tall cowboy standing beside her. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes, but she could see the concern etched across his sun-weathered face. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. He held the yoke across his own broad shoulders as if it weighed nothing at all, the buckets perfectly balanced on either side. "I can manage," Elena said automatically, though her voice shook and her legs trembled beneath her skirt. She was 22 and had been managing on her own for 3 years since her parents died of fever. Pride had kept her alive when nothing else would. "I am sure you can," the cowboy replied, falling into step beside her without waiting for permission. "But there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered. Name is James Sullivan. Most folks call me Sullivan." Elena hesitated, then started walking again, her empty arms feeling strange and light after hours of bearing weight. "Elena Morales. I work at the boarding house on 4th Street. "I know the place," Sullivan said. "Just rode into town this morning, looking for work at one of the ranches nearby. Heard the Circle K might be hiring." They walked together in silence for a few moments, Elena's breathing gradually slowing as relief flooded through her aching muscles. She studied Sullivan from the corner of her eye, noting the worn but well-maintained saddle bags slung over his shoulder, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than the swagger so many cowboys affected. His hands on the yoke were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who knew hard work intimately. "Why did you help me?" Elena asked finally, genuine curiosity overcoming her natural wariness. Men in Silver Creek usually wanted something in return for their kindness, and she had learned to be cautious. Sullivan glanced at her, and she saw something soft in those gray eyes despite his rugged exterior. "My mother used to carry water like that back in Texas. Watched her shoulders give out one day just like yours nearly did. I was too young to help her then, but I am not too young anymore." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep in Elena's chest, a place she had kept carefully guarded for so long. "I am sorry about your mother." "She is still alive, far as I know," Sullivan said with a slight smile. "Just getting older like we all do. Thought it was time I made something of myself so I could send money back to her and my younger sisters." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days but remained sturdy through Montana's harsh seasons. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, stood on the porch fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Her sharp eyes took in the scene immediately, her expression softening when she recognized Elena's exhaustion. "About time you got back, girl," Mrs. Henderson called out, but her tone lacked its usual edge. "Bring that water round to the kitchen." Sullivan followed Elena through the narrow alley beside the house to the kitchen entrance, carefully lowering the buckets beside the door. Elena's shoulders screamed in protest as she rolled them experimentally, trying to work feeling back into the strained muscles. "Thank you," she said, meeting Sullivan's eyes directly. "Truly, I do not know what would have happened if those buckets had spilled." "You would have figured something out," Sullivan replied. "You have got that look about you, the kind of person who survives no matter what." Before Elena could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "You looking for a room, Cowboy? We have got one available, cheap rates for respectable folk." Sullivan tipped his hat. "Might be interested, ma'am. Depends on whether I can find work in town." "Circle K is hiring," Mrs. Henderson said, echoing what Sullivan had already heard. "Boss man Thomas Kilpatrick usually comes into town on Saturday afternoons. That is tomorrow. You could catch him at the Silver Dollar Saloon around 3. "Much obliged," Sullivan said. He looked at Elena once more, something unspoken passing between them that made her heart beat faster. "Hope those shoulders heal up quick, Miss Morales." "Elena," she found herself saying. "You can call me Elena." His smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of hardship and replacing them with genuine warmth. "Then you should call me James." After he left, Elena poured the water into the large barrels Mrs. Henderson kept in the kitchen, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She had met hundreds of drifters and cowboys in her time at the boarding house, men passing through Silver Creek on their way to somewhere else, somewhere better. None of them had ever looked at her the way James Sullivan had, as if she mattered beyond the water she carried or the floors she scrubbed. That evening, Elena served dinner to the boarding house guests in the cramped dining room, carrying plates of beef stew and fresh bread while trying not to wince every time she raised her arms above her shoulders. She noticed James sitting at the corner table, talking quietly with an older man who worked at the general store. When she set his plate down, their fingers brushed accidentally, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her entire body. "Thank you," James said quietly, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You are welcome," Elena managed, suddenly aware of how close he was, how she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. Over the next few days, James became a fixture at the boarding house. He secured the job at Circle K Ranch and rode out before dawn each morning, returning after sunset covered in dust and sweat, but always with that same gentle smile for Elena. He started helping her with tasks around the boarding house without being asked, carrying heavy loads, fixing broken shutters, and chopping wood for the stove. Mrs. Henderson watched their growing friendship with shrewd eyes, but said nothing, perhaps recognizing something genuine developing between her hardworking boarder and her equally hardworking employee. Elena found herself looking forward to the moments they could steal together, brief conversations in the kitchen or on the porch after dinner when the other boarders had retired for the night. James told her about growing up in Texas, about his father who died in the war before he was born, about his dreams of owning his own small ranch someday where his mother and sisters could live comfortably. Elena shared her own story in return, about her parents who had emigrated from Mexico with hopes of a better life, about learning English in a one-room schoolhouse, about the fever that had stolen her family and left her alone in a territory that did not always welcome people who looked like her. "I am sorry you went through that," James said one evening as they sat on the back steps watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "No one should have to face that kind of loss alone. We all carry our burdens," Elena replied, hugging her knees to her chest. "Some are just heavier than others." James was quiet for a moment, then said, "You do not have to carry them alone anymore, not if you do not want to." Elena turned to look at him, her heart thundering in her chest. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp planes of his cheekbones and the intensity in his eyes. "What are you saying, James?" "I am saying that I have been in Silver Creek less than a week, and already I cannot imagine leaving without you." His voice was low and urgent, full of an emotion that made Elena's breath catch. "I know it is fast, probably too fast, but I have never felt this way before. Like I was wandering lost until I saw you struggling with those buckets, and suddenly I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. James, Elena whispered, her name for him sounding like a prayer on her lips. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused palm. Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I am not crazy. You are not crazy, Elena said, leaning into his touch. I feel it. I feel everything. When James kissed her, it was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Elena's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness falling away as they discovered each other in the soft Montana night. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, he said, with your permission and Mrs. Henderson's blessing. I want everyone in Silver Creek to know that you are mine and I am yours. Tears pricked Elena's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Yes, yes to all of it. Mrs. Henderson proved surprisingly supportive when James formally requested permission to court Elena the next morning. About time someone appreciated that girl properly, the older woman said gruffly, though her eyes were soft. You treat her right, Sullivan, or you will answer to me. Yes, ma'am, James said seriously. I intend to treat her better than right. I intend to treat her like the treasure she is. The courting period was both the longest and shortest time of Elena's life. James was true to his word, conducting their relationship with respect and genuine affection that made her fall deeper in love with him every single day. He brought her wildflowers picked on his ride back from the ranch, their petals still fresh with evening dew. He saved his wages to take her to the town social on Saturday nights, where they danced until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. He wrote her simple letters when he had to spend nights out on the range, his careful handwriting speaking of feelings he sometimes struggled to express aloud. But their happiness was not without challenges. Silver Creek had its share of people who looked askance at a white cowboy courting a Mexican woman, their disapproval ranging from cold stares to outright hostility. One afternoon, as Elena walked to the general store, a group of women from the so-called respectable part of town deliberately crossed the street to avoid her, their whispers loud enough to be clearly heard. Shameful, that Mexican girl thinking she can be with a white man. Someone should tell that cowboy what kind of trouble he is inviting. Elena kept her head high and continued walking, but the words stung like nettles against bare skin. She had faced prejudice her entire life, but it felt different now that it threatened to touch James too. She worried about what association with her might cost him, whether the ranch would let him go, whether the town would turn against him completely. James found her that evening sitting on the back steps of the boarding house, her shoulders hunched in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He sat down beside her without a word, simply taking her hand in his and lacing their fingers together. I heard what happened today, he said quietly. Mrs. Henderson told me. Maybe they are right, Elena said, hating how small her voice sounded. Maybe we are inviting trouble that neither of us needs. James turned to her, his expression fierce. The only thing I need is you. I do not care what those narrow-minded people think or say. My worth is not determined by their approval, and neither is yours. We have done nothing wrong by falling in love. But your job, your reputation, will survive just fine, James interrupted firmly. Thomas Kilpatrick already told me he judges a man by his work, not by who he loves. And anyone whose friendship depends on me giving you up was never truly my friend to begin with. Elena searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation, but found only unwavering conviction. You are sure about this, about us? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. James brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Elena Morales, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I would be a fool to let the ignorance of others come between us, and I am many things, but I am not a fool. Despite her worries, Elena felt herself smiling. No, you are definitely not a fool. Although, James added with a slight grin. Some might say I was foolish to fall in love so quickly. But even that I would not change. Their relationship deepened through the summer and into the fall, becoming something so solid and real that Elena could not remember what her life had been like before James walked beside her. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears and hopes for a future they were building together one day at a time. James proved himself again and again to be a man of his word, standing beside Elena whenever anyone questioned their relationship, defending her honor without violence but with a quiet strength that commanded respect. In October, as the Montana air turned crisp and leaves began to fall from the cottonwood trees, James asked Elena to take a walk with him after Sunday services. They strolled to the edge of town where the grasslands stretched endlessly toward distant mountains, the sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. James seemed nervous, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing uncertainty that made Elena's heart swell with affection. "I have been saving every penny I can spare," James said, stopping beside a particularly large cottonwood tree. "Talking to the bank about what it would take to start my own small ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough land to run some cattle and horses, build a decent house." "That sounds wonderful, James," Elena said. Wondering where this conversation was leading, James took both her hands in his gray eyes intense and full of emotion. "I want to build that house for us, Elena, for you and me together. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night knowing you are safe and loved. I want to give you the kind of life you deserve, where you never have to carry water until your shoulders give out again unless you choose to, where you are respected and cherished and honored." Elena's breath caught as James slowly lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small ring from his pocket. It was simple silver with a single small stone, modest but beautiful in its sincerity. "Elena Morales, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner and the greatest adventure of my life?" Tears streamed down Elena's face as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, James, I will marry you." "There is nothing I want more." James stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger, and Elena stared at it in wonder, this symbol of promises made and a future secured. They kissed under the cottonwood tree as the wind whispered through the branches, sealing their commitment with a tenderness that spoke of years to come. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of Silver Creek on a cold November morning. Mrs. Henderson closed the boarding house for the day and attended with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, having grown to love Elena like the daughter she never had. Several of James's fellow ranch hands came, along with Thomas Kilpatrick himself and his wife, their presence a powerful statement of support that silenced many of the town gossips. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, conducted by a priest who had known Elena since she first arrived in Silver Creek as a frightened girl of 14. Elena wore a dress of cream-colored cotton that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, with lace borrowed from another boarder and blue ribbons woven through her long dark hair. James wore his best shirt and pants, cleaned until they were practically spotless, his face shaved smooth and his eyes never leaving Elena's as she walked down the aisle toward him. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Elena with such reverence that several people in the small congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held in the boarding house dining room, with food contributed by friends and well-wishers who had come to celebrate despite the social pressures. Elena danced with her new husband until her feet protested, then danced some more because she could not bear to stop. The happiness that filled her was almost frightening in its intensity, a bright, sharp joy that made her previous life seem like shadows and dreams. "Happy," James whispered in her ear as they swayed together to music played on an old fiddle. "Beyond words," Elena replied, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They spent their wedding night in a hotel room James had rented for the occasion, the first time either of them had stayed somewhere so luxurious. Elena stood by the window looking out at the dark streets of Silver Creek, while James lit the lamp, suddenly nervous about this new intimacy despite the months of courtship. James seemed to sense her uncertainty because he came up behind her gently, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured. "There is no rush. We can just talk if you prefer." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at this man who had changed her entire world simply by taking 2 buckets from her tired shoulders. "I love you, James Sullivan, with everything I am." "And I love you, Elena Sullivan," James replied, cupping her face in his hands. "Forever and always." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered confessions and gentle explorations, the consummation of their love as natural and right as breathing. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the hotel's clean sheets, talking and laughing until sleep finally claimed them both. The winter months were challenging as James worked to secure the land for their ranch while continuing his job at Circle K. Elena stayed at the boarding house, working and saving her own wages to contribute to their shared dream. They spent evenings poring over maps and plans, discussing how many cattle they could afford initially, what crops might grow in the Montana soil, where to position the house for the best light and protection from winter winds. Thomas Kilpatrick proved to be unexpectedly helpful, offering advice based on his own years of ranching and even helping James negotiate with the bank for a reasonable loan. "You are a good worker, Sullivan," the older man said, clapping James on the shoulder. "And you have got a smart wife who knows the value of a dollar. You too will make that ranch thrive if anyone can." In early spring of 1883, James and Elena finalized the purchase of 160 acres about 5 miles from Silver Creek, land that included a creek for water, grazing pastures, and enough timber to build a modest house and barn. The day they rode out to stand on their own property for the first time as its legal owners, Elena felt emotions too big for words swelling in her chest. She thought of her parents, of their dreams for a better life that had been cut short, and hoped they could somehow see this moment, see their daughter standing on land that belonged to her, beside a man who loved her without reservation. "What do you think?" James asked, watching her face carefully. "I think we are home," Elena replied simply. Building the ranch consumed every spare moment and ounce of energy they possessed. James worked at Circle K during the day and on their own land in the evenings and weekends. Elena continued at the boarding house until they had walls and a roof, then moved out to live in their unfinished home, working from sunrise to sunset, planting a garden, mending fences, and preparing for the small herd of cattle James had purchased. Mrs. Henderson cried when Elena left but made her promise to visit regularly and sent her off with supplies and good wishes. The work was brutal and exhausting, testing them both in ways courtship never had. They had their first real argument over where to position the barn, voices raised in frustration and fatigue before they both stopped, looked at each other, and started laughing at the absurdity of fighting over something so inconsequential. They learned to communicate more effectively, to recognize when the other needed encouragement or space, to shoulder their burdens together rather than separately. One particularly difficult day in late spring, when Elena had been trying to dig fence post holes in ground that seemed determined to resist her efforts, she finally threw down her shovel in defeat and sat down hard on the prairie grass. Her shoulders ached, reminding her forcefully of that day she had been carrying water, the day everything had changed. James found her there half an hour later, staring at the horizon with tears of frustration on her cheeks. Without a word, he sat down beside her and pulled her against his side. "Tell me what you need." "I need this to be easier," Elena admitted, her voice breaking. "I need to not feel like we are fighting every inch of the way." "I know," James said softly, stroking her hair. I know it is hard, but we are building something real here, Elena, something that is ours. That is worth fighting for. I know that up here. Elena tapped her head, but sometimes the knowing does not reach far enough. James was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother once told me that anything worth having requires you to pour yourself into it completely. She said the exhaustion means you are giving it everything, and that is how you know it matters." Elena turned to look at him, seeing the same exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the same determination in the set of his jaw. "Your mother sounds very wise." She had her moments. James smiled slightly, then stood and offered Elena his hand. "Come on, let us finish this fence together. It will go faster with two." By midsummer, the ranch was operational if not prosperous, with 20 head of cattle grazing in their pastures and chickens in the coop Elena had built mostly by herself. The house had glass windows James had saved for months to afford, a stove that actually drew properly, and a bed they had constructed together from rough-hewn timber. It was not fancy, but it was sturdy and warm and utterly theirs. Elena discovered she was pregnant in August, recognizing the signs even before her monthly courses stopped. She told James one evening as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, pure joy followed immediately by tender concern for her health and comfort. "You do not have to work so hard now," James said, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "I can manage the heavier tasks." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Elena replied, though she was touched by his consideration. "I will let you know if something is too much, but I want to keep contributing, James. This ranch is as much mine as yours." "I know," James said quickly. "I did not mean to suggest otherwise." "I just want you and the baby safe." Elena softened, taking his hand. "We will be safe. We have you to protect us." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter, Elena's belly growing round while the Montana landscape turned white with snow. James hovered anxiously, trying to anticipate her every need, driving her slightly crazy with his protectiveness, until she finally sat him down and explained that she needed him to trust her to know her own limits. He apologized and tried to pull back, though she still caught him watching her with worried eyes whenever she lifted anything heavier than a plate. Mrs. Henderson visited regularly, bringing supplies and gossip from town, her experienced eye assessing Elena's health with approval. "You are doing fine, girl," she announced after one such visit. "Strong as an ox you are, this baby will come easy, mark my words." The baby did not come easy, but Elena survived the long night of labor in March of 1884 with James holding her hand and a midwife from town coaching her through each contraction. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Elena felt a love so fierce it nearly stopped her heart. James cradled the tiny infant with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from his son to his wife and back again. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Daniel after Elena's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he ruled it completely. Elena discovered depths of exhaustion she had not known existed during those first months of motherhood, but she also discovered wells of joy that made every sleepless night worthwhile. James was a devoted father, rising for the night feedings he could manage, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his off-key voice that somehow always soothed Daniel back to sleep. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily over the next few years. They added to their herd, built a bigger barn, planted more crops. James's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher spread through the territory, and gradually, even those who had initially disapproved of his marriage to Elena came to respect what they had built together. Elena became known for her excellent garden produce, which she sold in town, and for her skill in training horses, a talent she had inherited from her father and honed through patient practice. Daniel grew from infant to toddler to a bright, energetic boy who loved riding on his father's shoulders and helping his mother feed the chickens. In 1886, Elena gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who had her father's lighter coloring but her mother's determined spirit. The children filled the house with noise and laughter, and the kind of beautiful chaos that made the hard years of building the ranch seem worth every struggle. One evening in the summer of 1887, Elena stood at the kitchen window of their expanded home, watching James teach 5-year-old Daniel how to rope a fence post while 3-year-old Grace toddled after them, demanding her turn. The scene filled her with profound contentment, a sense of rightness she had never imagined possible during those desperate years after her parents died. James caught her watching and smiled, that same warm smile that had first captured her heart 5 years ago. He said something to Daniel, then walked toward the house, Grace clinging to his leg like a determined little barnacle. When he reached the porch, he set Grace down and came into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around Elena from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How far we have come," Elena replied, leaning back against him. "How that day I was carrying water until my shoulders gave out changed everything. Best decision I ever made, taking those buckets," James said, "changed my life completely." "Mine too." Elena turned in his arms to face him, seeing the years reflected in the lines around his eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his hair at the temples. "I love you, James Sullivan, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "That is good," James said, kissing her gently. "Because I plan on loving you more every single day for the rest of our lives." The years continued to roll forward, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. A harsh winter in 1888 killed several of their cattle, testing their financial stability and their resolve. Elena's vegetable crops failed one summer due to an unexpected drought, forcing them to rely solely on the cattle income. Daniel broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 7, giving them both several years of gray hairs. Grace proved to be as stubborn as she was sweet, arguing about everything from bedtime to vegetables with a lawyer's skill. But there were good times too, wonderful times. The ranch became profitable enough that they could afford small luxuries like store-bought cloth for dresses and real coffee, instead of the chicory substitute. Daniel showed an aptitude for ranching that made James swell with pride, the boy understanding cattle and horses with an intuition that could not be taught. Grace surprised everyone by learning to read at 4 years old, devouring every book they could acquire and begging for more. In 1890, Elena gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Samuel. He was a quiet, thoughtful baby who seemed content to observe the world from the safety of his mother's arms. James was 43 now, Elena 30, and they agreed that 3 children felt complete, their family exactly the right size. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1891, leaving the boarding house to Elena in her will along with a letter expressing how proud she was of the woman Elena had become. Elena cried for days, mourning the loss of the woman who had been like a mother to her during those difficult years alone. They sold the boarding house to a young couple just starting out, using the money to expand the ranch further and establish a college fund for their children. The town of Silver Creek grew and changed around them, the wildness of the frontier gradually giving way to established civilization. The railroad arrived in 1893, connecting them more firmly to the rest of the country. Electricity came to town, though it would be years before it reached their ranch. Automobiles began appearing on the streets, strange mechanical beasts that spooked the horses and fascinated the children. Through it all, James and Elena remained constants for each other, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. They had learned each other completely over the years, knew each other's moods and needs and fears. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, emerging stronger each time. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, James gave Elena a beautiful shawl he had ordered from San Francisco, deep blue with silver embroidery that reminded her of stars. Elena gave him a pocket watch engraved with their wedding date and the words "Forever beside you." "This is too much," James protested, though his eyes shone with emotion as he examined the watch. "Nothing is too much for the man who took my burdens and walked beside me," Elena replied, meaning every word. Daniel grew into a strapping young man who could rope and ride as well as any cowboy in Montana territory. He talked about studying veterinary medicine, wanting to help animals the way his father had built a life through honest work. Grace remained a voracious reader who announced at 12 that she intended to become a teacher so other children could discover the magic of books. Samuel, quiet Samuel, showed an unexpected talent for drawing, filling page after page with sketches of the ranch, the animals, his family. In the summer of 1896, when Elena was 36 and James was 49, they stood together on the hill overlooking their ranch, watching their 3 children working below. Daniel, now 12, was mending fence with the competence of someone twice his age. 10-year-old Grace had spread a blanket under a tree and was reading to 6-year-old Samuel, their heads bent together over the book. "We did good," James said, his arm around Elena's waist. "We did very good," Elena agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked quietly. "Marrying me, I mean, the prejudice we faced, the hard years building this place." Elena looked up at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment, do you?" "Never," James said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Elena. You and our children and this life we built. I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am happy," Elena assured him. "Tired sometimes, worried occasionally, but happy down to my bones. This is the life my parents dreamed of but never got to have. We are living their dream and ours together." James pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I love you. I love you too." The years marched on with increasing speed, childhood giving way to adolescence and then young adulthood for their children. Daniel left for university in 1898 to study veterinary medicine as he had always planned, writing letters home full of enthusiasm and homesickness, in equal measure. Grace announced her intention to attend Teachers College, her determination as fierce as everything else about her. Samuel, their quiet artist, wanted to stay on the ranch, to document through his drawings the vanishing world of the Old West. In 1902, when Elena was 42 and James was 55, they attended Daniel's graduation from veterinary school, bursting with pride as their son received his degree. He had met a young woman at university, a doctor's daughter named Catherine, and the way he looked at her reminded Elena forcefully of how James had looked at her all those years ago. They married the following year in a ceremony that brought the whole family together, and Elena cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to someone else. Grace finished Teachers College in 1904 and immediately secured a position at the school in Silver Creek, teaching children to read and write and think with the same passion she brought to everything. Samuel's drawings began attracting attention, with several galleries in larger cities expressing interest in displaying his work. He remained at the ranch, helping James manage the cattle and horses while pursuing his art in the early mornings and late evenings when the light was best. James's mother died peacefully in 1905 at the age of 78, surrounded by her daughters and their families. James made the long journey to Texas for the funeral, returning home with stories of his childhood and a bittersweet relief that his mother had lived to see him succeed. "She was proud of you," Elena told him as they lay in bed that night, his grief a palpable thing in the darkness. "Proud of the man you became, the family you built." "I hope so," James whispered. "I tried to honor her memory." "You did," Elena assured him. "You do every single day." Their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908 was celebrated with a party that brought friends and neighbors from all over the territory. Daniel and Catherine came with their 2 young sons, Elena's first grandchildren. Grace brought the young man she had been courting, a banker's son who looked at her like she hung the moon. Samuel had completed a series of drawings documenting the history of their ranch, which he presented to his parents as an anniversary gift. Elena stood in the yard of their ranch, now prosperous and well-established, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and felt the completeness of a life well lived. She caught James's eye across the crowd, and he smiled at her, that same smile that had first made her heart race 26 years ago. He made his way through the guests to her side, taking her hand. "Happy anniversary, wife," he said softly. "Happy anniversary, husband," Elena replied. They danced that evening under strings of lanterns hung from the trees, moving together with the practiced ease of decades spent learning each other's rhythms. The music was sweet, the night air warm, and Elena felt young again, transported back to that first town social where James had held her like she was something precious. "What are you thinking?" James asked, sensing her nostalgia. "About how grateful I am," Elena said honestly. "That you saw me struggling that day, that you took those buckets and walked beside me, that you chose to stay." "I did not choose to stay," James corrected gently. "I chose to build a life. There is a difference. Staying sounds temporary, like I might leave someday. Building a life means putting down roots so deep they can never be pulled up." "Then I am grateful you built a life with me," Elena amended, her throat tight with emotion. "The gratitude is mutual," James assured her. "You made me better than I ever could have been alone." The years after their 25th anniversary passed with increasing swiftness, marked by births and deaths, achievements and disappointments, the normal rhythm of a life fully lived. Daniel's veterinary practice thrived, and he eventually took over the livestock care for their ranch along with several others in the area. He and Catherine had 4 children total, each one a delight that made Elena appreciate the particular joys of grandmotherhood. Grace married her banker and moved to Helena, though she visited regularly and maintained her teaching position in Silver Creek, commuting when necessary because she refused to give up work she loved. Samuel married a quiet woman who shared his artistic sensibilities, and they built a small house on the ranch property, raising 3 children who grew up riding horses and helping with chores. James's hair turned completely silver, and his movements became slower, though his strength remained impressive for a man approaching 60. Elena developed arthritis in her shoulders, a cruel irony given how their love story began, but she managed the pain with stoic acceptance. They scaled back their direct involvement in ranch operations, gradually turning more responsibility over to Samuel and hired hands, content to advise rather than lead. In the spring of 1915, as they approached their 32nd anniversary, James had a spell of dizziness that worried Elena enough to insist Daniel examine him. Her son found an irregular heartbeat, nothing immediately dangerous but a warning that James needed to take life easier. James grumbled about being treated like an invalid but complied with the restrictions, spending more time on the porch in his rocking chair and less time riding the range. Elena joined him there most afternoons, the two of them watching the world go by with the contentment of people who had worked hard and earned their rest. They talked about everything and nothing, revisiting old memories and making new ones, their conversation as easy as breathing after decades of practice. "You remember the first thing I said to you?" James asked one particularly beautiful afternoon, the sky impossibly blue above them. "Easy now, I have got them," Elena quoted, smiling at the memory. "You took my burdens like they weighed nothing." "They weighed plenty," James corrected. "I just did not want you to know how heavy they were." "Why not?" "Because I could see you were the kind of person who would have taken them back if you thought they were too much for me to carry." James reached over and took her hand, his touch as familiar as her own heartbeat. "You have always been strong, Elena, that first day, every day since." "Strongest person I know." "I learned from you," Elena said softly. "You taught me that strength is not about carrying burdens alone, it is about knowing when to share the load." We make a good team, James observed. The best team, Elena agreed. They celebrated their 32nd anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. James seemed tired but happy, his eyes still bright when he looked at Elena across the dinner table. They danced one slow dance in the parlor while Samuel played guitar, holding each other close and swaying gently to music only they could fully hear. "I love you," James whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Elena replied. "Always and forever." James passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, his hand still holding Elena's as dawn broke over the Montana horizon. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had simply worn out after 68 years of beating steadily. Elena sat beside his body for a long time, memorizing his face in the morning light, grateful beyond words that they had been given so many years together, that he had not suffered, that his last conscious moments had been spent lying beside her in the bed they had shared for more than 3 decades. The funeral drew people from across the territory, a testament to the respect James Sullivan had earned through a lifetime of honest work and fair dealing. Elena stood beside the grave in her best black dress, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and spoke of the man who had taken her burdens and chosen to walk beside her for the rest of his days. She did not break down, did not fall apart, because James would have wanted her to be strong. But later, alone in the house that suddenly felt too large and too empty, she let herself grieve fully, weeping for the loss of her partner, her friend, her great love. The months after James's death were the hardest of Elena's life, including those desperate years after her parents died. She had grown so accustomed to his presence, to sharing her thoughts and days with him, that his absence felt like a physical wound. But she was not alone, not really. Her children rallied around her, visiting frequently and including her in their daily lives. Her grandchildren filled the house with noise and energy that chased away some of the shadows. And the ranch itself, the land she and James had built into something lasting, provided both comfort and purpose. Elena lived for another 11 years after James died, remaining sharp and active despite her advancing age. She saw all her grandchildren grow into adulthood, attended more weddings and births than she could count, and became a beloved matriarch whose advice was sought on everything from planting crops to raising children. She spoke often of James, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him or had been too young to remember him clearly. In the summer of 1926, at the age of 66, Elena fell ill with pneumonia. The doctors did what they could, but her body was worn out from a lifetime of hard work and the accumulated sorrows of loss. Daniel sat beside her bed, holding her hand just as she had held his father's so many years ago. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently. Elena smiled, her eyes already looking at something beyond what her son could see. "No, your father is waiting for me, I can feel it." "What should I tell the grandchildren about you and Dad?" Daniel asked, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Tell them about the day I was carrying water until my shoulders gave out," Elena said softly. "Tell them how your father took those buckets and walked beside me, and how that simple act of kindness changed both our lives forever. Tell them that love is not always grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Sometimes it is just choosing to carry someone's burden when they can no longer bear it alone. Tell them we built something real and lasting because we worked together, respected each other, and never forgot why we fell in love in the first place." Elena Morales Sullivan died peacefully that evening, slipping away as the sun set over the land she had called home for more than 4 decades. She was buried beside James under the cottonwood tree where he had proposed, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single shared inscription: "Forever beside you." The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each successive generation adding their own chapter to the story that began when a cowboy took 2 heavy buckets from a struggling woman and chose to walk beside her. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky, those who listened carefully swore they could sometimes hear the echo of laughter and music, as if somewhere beyond sight, James and Elena were still dancing together, still walking side by side through eternity. Their love story became legend in Silver Creek and the surrounding territory, passed down through families, and shared with newcomers as an example of what could be built when two people committed fully to each other, and to the life they wanted to create. It was a reminder that the greatest adventures were not always the ones found in far-off places, but sometimes in the simple choice to help someone in need, to stay when you could leave, to build when it would be easier to drift. And so the story of she was carrying water until her shoulders gave out, the cowboy took the buckets and walked beside, became more than just the origin of one marriage. It became a philosophy, a way of approaching relationships and community that emphasized partnership over dominance, kindness over cruelty, shared burdens over solitary struggle. Children grew up hearing the tale and learning from it, understanding that true strength lay not in carrying everything alone, but in knowing when to ask for help and when to offer it. The legacy of James and Elena Sullivan lived on in every fence mended, every crop planted, every child raised with love and taught to be kind. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name, in the town that remembered them with fondness, in the descendants who carried forward the values they had embodied. They had taken nothing and built something, transformed struggle into triumph, turned a chance meeting on a dusty road into a love that would outlast their mortal years. And perhaps that was the greatest testament to their story. Not that they had lived and loved and died, which everyone must eventually do, but that they had lived and loved in such a way that their story continued to inspire long after they were gone. They had proven that even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, tenderness could thrive. That even in an era marked by prejudice and hardship, two people from different worlds could create something beautiful together. That the simple act of taking someone's burden and choosing to walk beside them could be the beginning of everything that mattered. The sun set over the Montana territory, as it had every day since long before James Sullivan took 2 heavy buckets from Elena Morales and changed both their lives forever. The land endured, the seasons turned, and somewhere in the twilight between memory and eternity, a cowboy and the woman he loved walked together still, their hands joined, their hearts content, their story complete and perfect in every way that truly mattered.